This channel is for educational purposes only. Make sure you do your own due diligence before making any investments. And there is inherent risk in trading, so it's speculative. Just make sure you keep that in mind. Hi, this is Joe Rabil with Invest Like a Pro. I got a great question today from one of the viewers, and I just wanted to go ahead and do a video on it because I thought it was relevant, especially to some of the videos that I have posted over the last month or so. It's related to using multiple time frames and which time frames do you want to trade? Do you want to trade on a monthly, weekly? I use a combination typically of two back-to-back time frames, so either monthly, weekly, weekly, daily, or daily, hourly would be typical choices. And so the question was, if you get a setup on the daily and hourly, do you take it, or are you looking for am I looking for a specific time frame? And so I'm going to go into that a little bit today because I do think it is very relevant, especially based on what's taken place in the marketplace over the past month or two. The example I'm going to use is Ambarella, AMBA. I've got my 4 time frames up, so I like to look at a stock in all 4 of these time frames first before even thinking about whether we're, which time frames I want to look at, because I do want to see what the bigger time frames are doing. Just keep in mind, even if you're going to trade off of a daily and an hourly time frame, having the wind at your back because you have a strong trend on a monthly and a weekly is a huge advantage. And I use that to my advantage, even if I'm going to do a shorter term trade, which would typically be based off of an hourly. I love it when I know I've got, a really powerful breakout pattern or really strong momentum conditions on the weekly. So just looking at this, we've already made a pretty substantial move. We're up 3 or 4 months here, and last month ended with a pretty big tail on the AMBA. Now, that isn't going to prevent me from doing a trade on the hourly. I've got other things that I'm going to look at, and I'm going to go into detail on that in a minute. But I do like to just recognize what's taken place. I mean, when you get a big breakout like this, typically, and you run up for 3 or 4 months, and then you start to show signs that sellers are showing up with that big tail, it would suggest to me that there's a pretty good chance that this monthly chart wants to take a breather for a month or two. So if I know that in the back of my mind, it is going to have somewhat of a bias when I'm looking at the hourly chart, because if I know it's going to take a month or two to consolidate on the higher time frame, or at least the odds favor that, then I'm going to be a little bit more reluctant to take a trade off of a short time frame to the upside. So now, again, I'm going to get into more detail. There's 2 pretty key criteria that I look at in any 2 time frames when I'm trying to decide whether I want to play those. But let's also look at the weekly chart. So again, we made a nice move, but look at what happened last week. Look at the size of that bar. That's a pretty big bar. And also note that the ADX line had been up around 60 and is starting to drop off. And in fact, we can also see that the MACD has made a pretty substantial move away from the 0 line. These are all factors that I think you want to take into account when you're thinking about trading these higher time frames. And again, we want to avoid buying something that has a higher degree of pullback risk. And when I look at these higher time frames, it kind of looks like that to me. So just going through this and saying, if I'm browsing through and I'm looking at a whole bunch of stocks, this would be probably one where I would be more focused on looking for a pullback for a monthly, weekly, or potentially a weekly, daily setup. I really wouldn't be looking for the shorter term time frames at this point because I think it's made too much of a run. And let's go ahead and look at the daily chart. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now. So what I like to see is after a stock has gone sideways and consolidated, we get a breakout move to the upside. And then one of the factors I'm trying to decide if I'm going to play a daily, hourly, is I'm looking to play the first 2 pullbacks. And I've said that over and over again. Sometimes the pullback's a little bit longer like this, where it goes sideways and consolidates. And other times it's really quick. And if you look at this particular one, it was only 3 or 4 days, and then it turned around and moved up. And so once I get 2 signals after a consolidation pattern,
I'm probably good. I mean, I'm probably thinking that's probably it for now, and we probably need to go through a little bit more of a complex correction. And so I'm looking to play the first two pullbacks. Sometimes they look like beautiful bull flags, and other times like this, they can be a little bit different. They have a little bit different look to them. One of the qualifiers, if we go to the hourly, is if we get that opposing trend pattern. So let me zoom out a little bit. So if we go back and look at, this pullback here, we had the 18 cross down below the 40, and this pullback here, we had the 18 cross down below the 40. So you did have two signals. And in fact, if I scroll back even more, this was this sideways pattern where it took a while. I'm pretty much looking for the signal that took place here, right at this level. And my reasoning is that's where that's where we caught up on the daily chart. We finally caught up, and I'll just mark this on the chart. And then if we go back to the hourly, you can see that we had finally caught up to the 18, and we had an opposing trend, 18 below the 40. And so I would view that as a signal. This was sort of a second entry, if you will, on the same pattern. So I consider that to be, the same entry or the same setup. And then we had a run up, and then we got another consolidation, and the 18 crossed down below the 40. So in both of those cases, we had a mild pullback based on the ADX. On the selling side, both of those cases, we never got any real strength to the red DI. And so if you notice what's taking place on this pullback, we've gotten a really strong sell-off controlled by the sellers. The red DI has taken over command, and the ADX is above the prior green DX. And that tells me that this is too strong of a decline. And it would pretty much eliminate this as a potential trade for me, simply because the sellers are too strong on this pullback, and that tells me this actually is probably going to take a lot longer to turn things around, since the sellers are very strong. So if we go back to the daily chart, the point I'm trying to make here is, if you're going to look at two different time frames, let's look at all four together and just focus on these top two. So I'm looking for the first two pullbacks that cause an opposing trend where the 18 crosses down below the 40 on the hourly. And when that happens, I want to make sure that when we get that opposing trend, where the 18 crosses down below the 40, that the ADX on the sell side is not strong. And if I have that, I will play it. Now, it doesn't mean, I know what I've said here is that I only want to play the first two. If you have 18 above the 40, both lines rising at about the same rate, and it's really consistent, and you don't have any real blow-off moves to the upside, like you have here, a big, strong move to the upside, or kind of like what looks like a climax move, you can continue to play more than two. But generally speaking, the highest probability trades are going to be the first two pullbacks after a breakout. So wanted to make sure I covered this in a little bit more detail. If we get this type of pattern where the hourly is very strong, the sellers are showing a lot more strength, then I'm actually now saying, okay, I'm looking for the 18 to cross down below the 40 on the daily time frame and see if I can't get an opposing trend pattern on a weekly daily setup. Now, during the decline, if we get a strong red reading that causes the ADX to climb above the prior peak in green, then that would also discount this decline. When you look at the weekly chart, we've had this breakout move, but we really haven't had a pullback setup on the weekly. So I would be inclined to be thinking that we should be able to get a weekly daily on this AMBA. But again, I'm gonna focus on the momentum of the decline and make sure that that momentum is not too strong. So the other factor that I think you could take a look at is, if you notice, we had a big strong move, really strong momentum confirmation, new highs in both ADX and the MACD, and then we had a consolidation, and then we went to a new high here, and you might have taken this trade here, but now look at what happened on this last leg. ADX has clearly made a lower peak. And on this last pullback, we have green DI dropping down below 25 for the first time. Also note the fact that the MACD is showing a momentum divergence. Now, the reason why I'm even bringing this up is that this stock still has a 18 above the 40 and both lines rising, and the price is above the 40. So it does meet the criteria of what I use on my multiple time frame setup. It does meet those criteria, but I hope based on what I have shown on both MACD and ADX, that this would kind of be disqualified if I'm going through the stocks one by one. So please continue to ask more questions and post comments. Hit that like button for me to help with the YouTube algorithm, and we'll talk to you next time.